Good morning.
Got people filtering in, so thanks so much for joining us. We're always amazed, aren't we, Helen, that we actually get people to these things.
You're not supposed to say that. Of course we're not amazed.
Should be a good one. Looking forward to it. Is it your first webinar? Certainly feels like it.
Yeah, be nice. Morning, Millie.
How are we all doing, guys? Have we all got a heat wave? Because I feel like, yeah, Gateshead is feeling very sweaty right now. So let me know what it's like in your area and how you're coping in the school holidays, people with children. It is very nice, Jane, you're right. I bet you've got some kind of fan system there.
Yeah, we shouldn't complain about the heat, really. It doesn't come around often enough for it to be a problem.
No, but we don't have aircon, that's the main problem. Well, I do say that whilst drinking a hot coffee. I really don't help myself. We're probably giving everyone a minute to join. Let me know if you've got any nice plans for the rest of the school holidays. I was saying to the guys, I made the mistake of taking a holiday in June, so now it's just a long slog to Christmas. So it's gonna be fun for me.
I know. Well, I did even worse. Mine was in April.
You can tell, Paul, you need a break.
Yeah.
So just give everyone another couple of minutes. Oh, that sounds nice, Jane. Where are you going for that? Don't keep us in suspense. Put it in the chat.
Yeah, who's on holiday? Make us jealous.
I've just got back from a caravan holiday. I think that sounds absolutely lovely. You just need to change the scene, really, don't you? I felt that's the main thing.
A change is as good as a break, isn't that what they say?
Really is. I feel like we've coordinated today. We've got our black t-shirts on. We've got our Starbucks Discovery mugs.
Yeah, that wasn't planned, was it? But we just realised on the last run through that we're both repping the Sainsbury's, the Starbucks mugs this morning.
I've swapped to Magic Kingdom, so yeah.
Oh, have you? Mine's still Seattle.
Right, I think people have joined. Yeah, we've got a couple of latecomers, so I'll just give everyone one more minute and then we'll get kicked off into the good stuff.
I've got a crying baby in the background, so I'm probably going to put myself on mute so that it doesn't interrupt your flow, Saz.
We can't hear that at all. Press it.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, I've got two snoring dogs that I don't think come through either, so it's probably for the best that noise.
Technology's getting so good these days,
really
blocking it all out.
Yeah, get yourself on mute. I'll set us up, get us started, and then yeah, I'll bring you in. Take a rest. So thanks so much for joining, guys. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the call. I think hopefully you're in the right place. We're going to be looking at the customer feedback framework and then hopefully showing you that it actually works and some kind of theoretical to practice examples of it really working. So today you've got me, very familiar face, I'm sure, probably sick of hearing from me. I work in the account management team, specifically in social housing. And then I've brought in the big guns today. So my boss, Helen, she's freshly back from maternity leave, and we thought we'll welcome her back with another webinar, just what she needs, especially with a sick child. So thanks for joining us, Helen. We appreciate it. So for today, we've got roughly an hour planned, and then you can go away and get your lunch. So we're going to start with some setting the scene, and that's me, and then move into Helen, who's going to cover the framework and give you some examples of that in action. Back to me for a little bit of chat about this actually working with a specific case study, and then we'll go into next steps and Q&A. Yeah, it's a lovely group today, so do put your questions in the group. We want to try and have that, that community feel and have kind of your burning questions answered, especially if they're difficult. We can hand them over to Helen, so get your questions in the group, and then we'll discuss some next steps. And we've got a brand new resource that we haven't shared before, so yeah, I'm looking forward to getting that out and getting some feedback on that. So yeah, do pop your questions in the chat though as we're going through. we thought we'd kick off with a little poll. So this is all about your feedback, and we've got quite a few kind of new people on the call. So we were really keen to understand, what is your burning issue? What do you feel like your most kind of pressing feedback challenges? And you can see everybody's answers as well, which I think is quite nice. So do go in and answer our little poll there, and give us a kind of starting point for this issues. I'm sure most of you probably want to just tick all 4, right? So go through and let us know what you're thinking. We've got a bit of a split so far. So too much data. Yeah, I think we've been talking about kind of data-rich, insight poor for a long time. And yeah, don't have a way to prioritise actions and no evidence to support action plan. So nobody feels like they're struggling to get buy-in, which I think is a nice way to start. It's an interesting kind of split across the options there. No evidence. That's good because Helen's going to touch on that. So yeah, that leads us in nicely to the webinar. I think we've set you up perfectly there, Helen. So great. So we'll move on. So who are we? So again, just for the newbies on the call, so we are an enterprise customer feedback analysis platform, specifically in social housing. What does that mean? It means we help you to take your tenants' feedback, whether that's TSMs, complaints, transactional surveys, anywhere that you collect data. We help you to get that action plan that you need to kind of get buy-in to ultimately improve the customer experience. So as I said, I work specifically in the social housing space. So we've got some great brands. We work alongside Town and Country, Riverside, One Manchester, Guinness Partnership, a real wide range of both quite small and, some of the biggest in the business. So yeah, great kind of spread across the social housing space. And then Helen deals with everything else. So financial services, retail, travel and hospitality. And I think it's actually really nice because you might think that they're quite different to you and that social housing is quite specific. But what we found over the years is that these brands all have very, very similar challenges, and they tend to approach their data in a similar kind of way. So we're sharing best practices, learnings from them. As we always do at Wordnerds, we take their ideas and we pass them off as our own. So that's always a nice way to kind of start. So we'll be taking you through, like I said, the framework in a bit more detail. Where are we starting this from? So again, I just wanted to kind of set the scene. Maybe you can listen to this, see if this is the challenge that resonates with you, get a feel of where you're at. I think one of the main things that we're always told at Wordnerds is that feedback is just so challenging. And I think that's the main challenge. But I just thought I'd include a little bit of Chinese in here just to give you a bit of kind of context of where we see the problem. So there's a Chinese idea, which is Weiji. And what it means is within every opportunity or crisis, there's always a turning point. And I think that's a really important point that we want to hammer home at the start of the webinar. So feedback is super, super challenging. English in particular is very, very difficult. And dealing with words is just, yeah, who wants that? If only we could make them like numbers, that would be ideal. But within the feedback, there are so many opportunities. So we find the main problems are kind of categorized into these 4 points. So the first one is that your feedback volumes are always rising, and that's for a few different reasons. Obviously, tenants are their voices really being amplified in the sector at the moment. We're seeing loads of campaigns to increase tenant feedback, and also you're getting more homes. There's mergers. There's lots of reasons that are you're seeing increased kind of volumes, and also you're probably doing your surveys more frequently, trying to capture as much feedback as you can. Regulatory pressure. So, of course, things like Awaab's law coming in October and the Make Things Right campaign. So very much, lots and lots of pressures to get it right, and not just get it right, but to have that kind of action plan. We're empowering tenants to communicate more openly, and that's quite rightly kind of holding us all to account. And this is where it gets really challenging, right? So you're trying to wrangle this information. You've got lots of complex systems, and I think anyone that's been through a merger will know how messy that can really get. And at the same time, all that I'm being told on calls is, if anything, the number of people in your team is shrinking. So, some big HAs are operating with kind of 2 or 3 people in their customer experience team. And they're being asked to do more than ever with smaller budgets than we've ever seen. Staff need upskilling. We know the regulations are coming in for that. But when do you have time to kind of do that and take that kind of helicopter view? What does that mean in your day-to-day? You've got overwhelming amounts of data in lots of different silos. And I think Helen's going to start by touching on some of those silos. You can't categorize efficiently, what takes what takes days should really just take minutes. And you're very much stuck at those surface level insights when it's really hard to understand root causes, what's behind the actual problems, and build evidence-based business cases that can actually get buy-in. And you want to change that no clear roadmap feeling to a proven framework that you can follow. You know, you want to be with that kind of best in class brands, and really looking at something that's going to help you to enhance that tenant experience. And I think we all know there's unlimited opportunity in Verbatim. It really gives us a lot of context behind the scores and metrics and shows us the real people. There's lots of powerful emotional drivers and pain points. It captures issues that are just not covered in structural questions, and also offers the authentic customer voice, which we're all trying to really capture and amplify there. So I hope that sets the scene. I hope if you're looking at this, you're probably, you're nodding, maybe you've got different kind of perspectives on this, but hopefully that should give you a kind of a starting point for where we're coming at the problem. And then I'm going to hand over to Helen now. You have to come off mute, Helen, unfortunately. And she's going to take us through this feedback framework to really give you a way to do this.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the reminder to come off mute. So I'm not doing this from that perspective of being on mute the whole time. So yes, hi everyone, and really nice to be here this morning. So this is the Wordnerds Feedback Framework. As Sarah's mentioned, we sit with hundreds of teams every year, and what we realized quite quickly is that everybody seems to be, or the best teams certainly seem to be doing some very similar things in terms of how they process and analyze their feedback, but also how they turn that feedback into something that is useful, meaningful and impactful for the end customer, your tenants, depending on which sector we're in. It's worth saying that this framework works for all sorts of challenges. It's designed to work for those people who feel like they're data rich and insight poor, which from the poll, we can see already that a lot of you are kind of in that space of just being too much data, feeling a bit overwhelmed, not having clear ways to prioritize things, and potentially not having any evidence to support the action plans. Those key strategies that the business is putting together. The way that this framework works is to essentially take those core objectives that the business cares about. Typically within social housing, these tend to be things like how do we improve tenant satisfaction, what's wrong with our repairs service, why is our TSM score changed, what evidence have we got to understand why that change has come in. And obviously there's a ton more questions that you're being asked, and we tend to find that insight teams do get inundated with all sorts of questions. But what we find is, irrespective of the question that you're being asked, this framework is a really nice way of just working through those challenges, those questions that you want, and delivering something that's impactful, but also that you guys and the rest of your team has the confidence that when you make these recommendations, they're the right ones, they're evidence backed, and hopefully the process isn't too onerous. So as I say, we start with your core objectives and your key metrics. TSM scores, CSAT, customer satisfaction, anything around those tend to be the typical ones. And you then need to go about collecting the data, categorising that data and prioritising that data. For today, particularly based on the results of the poll, I think we'll focus in on the insight loop, so that the first section, how do we get to a point where the insights are actionable? And we truly mean actionable, as in you can take these away, or your teams can take these away, and they have a roadmap, or they understand how they can start to think about fixing some of these issues. On a future webinar, we'll start to give you some additional advice on once you've got those insights, how do you make them as impactful as possible? How do you make sure that they're working? And we'll come on to that a little bit at the end. I thought I'd start from the perspective of some common anxieties. Sarah and I sit on calls all year, and irrespective of the sector, actually, we hear the same things, which is this idea that you need to get your ducks in a row before you start. And getting your ducks in a row can be a really challenging thing to do. So you don't need to have all of your surveys set up and running. They don't need to be absolutely perfect. They don't need to touch every touch point. I think most of you at this stage will probably have a TSM survey going out. Most of you will probably have some transactional surveys. They may not cover every service, but you've got some additional data. You've also got a complaints process, which ultimately will be working because, again, regulations are specifying that. Equally, everybody talks about the dream of all of our systems being integrated, and I'm here to tell you that absolutely nobody has those. Systems set up. At the same time, everybody thinks that everybody else is further along than they are. And again, whenever we get on a call, most people are actually pleasantly surprised to realize that they're not as far behind as they thought they were. And often what we see is we're so busy at the moment, we'll look at this next quarter and the same thing happens again. And you find yourself the year's gone before you've blinked. So really the message is, if you've got verbatim feedback sitting in your remit, and that can be survey responses, it can be complaints data, anything that you're looking at, you're ready to get started, and you can really make big differences and within your organization, even when you're going from a standing start. And so what I'm going to talk you through today is just those first three sections of how we collect the data, some of the common things that people find when they're collecting the data, some instances on categorizing the data, and then I'll finish on some ways that you can start to bring those priorities and action plans into play as well. So goal number one is to unify your feedback. I don't know how many suppliers, I'm sure it's on our website as well, sorry marketing team. The 360-degree customer feedback program is probably the ultimate goal, and it's the thing that insight teams are told all the time, this is what we need to have. What does that mean from a social housing space? Well, potentially it means, like, how do we get all of that customer feedback anecdotally, as well as the more formalized feedback that's coming in? How do we collect all of that and put it into one place? So TSM surveys, transactional surveys, and complaints are probably the three that we deal with most often. But equally, what else is out there that could help to inform and understand what might be influencing tenant satisfaction, perceived satisfaction against actual, as well as just generally what grumbles are coming up before they become more acute. And often places like your social media channels, CRM notes and call transcripts can house a lot of this stuff. And equally, your frontline teams that are face-to-face with tenants day to day, they also could potentially feed in. Obviously, there's some complexity here in how you can sort of unify all of this data together. Basically, what I'm here to tell you is that actually, you can start from anywhere. We often talk about siloed data being a really negative thing. It is a challenge, but what I would say is actually it's often the place that most people start. So if you're working in spreadsheets and you're kind of collecting this data through your surveys, and then you're thinking about, well, I've got this spreadsheet here and I've got this spreadsheet here that looks at some of our survey data, that is the perfect place to start, because you're already starting this process already. What I would say is look for your most accessible or your highest value data and start there when we're looking at sort of improving the processes. Look at them one-on-one, get your understand your analysis and analyze that data as it comes through. At some point, though, what we want to start doing is bringing in the next data set. And it really is, it's a step-by-step process, this. Nobody goes, here's all of my data, go and analyze it all together. We literally work channel by channel. So the next thing, if we've got surveys right, is, or let's say we're starting with a TSM survey, okay, how do the TSM survey results compare to your transactional surveys? And we start to look at the patterns and the trends and the comparisons between those two. And then the next common one that people tend to look at is complaints. Hopefully none of this is too scary or too unfamiliar from what you're currently doing now. And again, we're starting to look at multiple channels here and looking at those comparisons across those channels. It's worth saying then the end goal here is start thinking about how we integrate some of these systems to make your lives easier. And some of the tooling that people use, BI tools to kind of report this data where the rest of your team are, but also data lakes, which allow you to kind of unify all of your conversations into something that's a little bit more systematized than just individual spreadsheets, and equally bespoke integrations. I don't have to tell you that this process is a long one, and that you obviously at the point where you're looking at an integrated ecosystem with your CX program, you're probably bringing in your IT teams, and we all know that they're quite they can be quite stretched as well. So I'm here to say, start with the siloed data. That's totally cool. We can do lots with it. And ultimately, the most exciting bit is when we start categorising this data and prioritising it. This is where the good stuff happens. The aim of categorisation is to go from what we call chaos, that is unstructured data, which is very messy, into something that is a bit more organised. It provides some clarity. You can start to make some decisions from the point of categorising your data. It's also the point at which I find when we speak to clients, they sit on one or two sides of the fence. They either love this stage, and kudos to you if you're in this stage. Lots of analysts we know love being in the data, love seeing what being close to the customer verbatim. It's the point at which it really it can make a connection with you, and it's really important that we don't lose those connections when we're reporting this data. These are, particularly in your sector, these are people's lives that we're often dealing with. And I want to stress that when we're talking about categorisation, we definitely don't want to lose the human element of what these people are saying. At the same time, the other people on the fence are, and shout out if you are one of these, if you're in the process of categorising your data, particularly if you're using, if you're doing this manually in spreadsheets, this is where people tend to want to throw their laptop out the window and kind of lose the will to live. The process of manually going through all of those comments, it can be very long-winded, and for a lot of people, they just find it boring. It's quite a low-value task, and you guys are all high performers, and you know there's lots more that we need you to be doing outside of just manually going through the spreadsheets and trying to get this into some kind of order. So kudos to you if you're manually tagging. This isn't by any means a slag on that, but what I would say is, particularly if you can't keep up with the volume and you're struggling with the volumes of feedback, which a few of you mentioned from the poll, it's really important that you start to look at ways in which you can essentially provide a bit of a lift using technology to basically handle the volume essence here. The other thing that I would say with manual tagging is to be very aware that at this point we start to introduce human bias, which is never it's something that everybody's told to be aware of, but also it naturally comes out. The other thing I'd say is, for those of you that are coding with colleagues, often what we find is that coding can be quite inconsistent. People's perceptions of what something is can be very different. So when you're tagging data, sometimes your colleague might tag it in a different way, and again, at the point where you've got inconsistencies, you might be missing things or not getting to the point where you've got accurate numbers on things. There's now a group of you that are trying GenAI using Copilot, ChatGPT to kind of give you a summary of what's in this data. Whilst the summaries can sound very convincing, I would say that they often don't give you a number. So they're very good at saying, you know, some people have a problem with damp and mold, some people have got an issue with the repair service, but what it doesn't say is actually the number of people that have commented on the quality of their repair in the last month has gone up by 10%, or has gone up by 20 cases, or whatever it might be. That specificity is really important when you're analyzing data and feeding this back to the business. The other thing that I would say is, and if you haven't tested it, I would absolutely go and check, is that GenAI is really, really common for hallucinations. And what we mean by that is it's just a fancy way of saying it makes stuff up. So whilst it might sound really, really convincing, and it may not actually, these issues may not actually be occurring in your data, there are ways around that good that you can obviously work on, but that in itself is not great. And the other thing that I would say is definitely go and check with your infosec teams on whether or not you can be using this stuff. Often these open source LLMs, large language models, they actually use your data to feed back into a wider training model, at which point your infosec team will be very upset that you've started using this stuff. And then there's a group of you that are using out-of-the-box solutions. So these are sort of your AI solutions that come off the back of some of your survey tools, perhaps. And what we would say about these are they've started to introduce AI, but we often say that they use what we call a black box solution. So what we mean by that is you can't necessarily understand why the solution that you're using has given you the result that it has. If you can't understand its decision-making process, it's known as a black box. So we tend to try and stay away from that, so that ultimately we would advise staying away from that just because you need to have some control over the decisions that it's making. The other thing that I would say is often out-of-the-box solutions are designed for your traditional high street retailer. So they tend not to have very good specificity when it comes to the kind of the problems that you see with tenant feedback. So they lack that sort of sector knowledge, and that can be really frustrating. Customer service in retail is very different to what it means in a social housing space. They've never come across issues with damp and mold or mental health in the way that your data and the customers that you're dealing with, the vulnerabilities that they might have. It doesn't understand that level of detail, and therefore it doesn't always treat those things in the way that it should. What I would say is when you're categorizing data, the end result needs to look something like, whether you use Wordnerds or something else, it needs to put a number. You need to understand exactly how many people are talking about a specific issue or a specific topic. So we want exact numbers on things at the end of the day. And you can do this on one spreadsheet, or you can do this on multiple data channels, but we want that exact reporting. The second thing that's helpful, and there are multiple tools out there that can help you do this, is sentiment by topic. So not only do we want to understand what people are talking about, we want to understand how they feel about the topics that they're talking about. So some level of sentiment analysis is really helpful, and this can be positive, neutral, and negative, or it can be a more detailed, it can be something a bit more detailed than that as well. And you also want to be able to, from this information, drill down to see root causes. What we mean by that is, what are the top level things that people are talking about, your broad topics. So this is a repair issue, this is a safety issue, this is a customer service issue within the complaints team. And then we want to drill down into the next level. So what happens below that? So within safety, it's a damp and mold issue. It's in this location. You know, we basically want to follow the data down the rabbit hole to the point where you can actually action this information. Knowing that we've got an issue with our complaints, customer service, not helpful. At the point where you've got something more specific, so you know, when people log this type of complaint, this happens, that allows you to then go, okay, we need to really focus in on here and put something in place. So that's what we mean by drilling down to see the root cause. The third thing then we want to do is prioritize this data. And I'm going to share quite a few bits here in terms of what we mean by prioritization. A few of you mentioned that you have no evidence to support action plans, or you don't necessarily have a way to prioritize your actions. So hopefully this is a useful starting point for how you work through that particular process, depending on what your data looks like. So the ultimate goal with prioritizing data is, firstly, to create actionable recommendations, but also we know that teams get incredibly overwhelmed by new information. So we both want to present this data in a way that makes sense to them. But also we want to, am I still here? I can see Sarah's gone. Apologies, guys, if I'm still here. Oh, great. Thank you, Linda. So ultimately where we want to get to here is, so we want to make actionable recommendations. I've just turned my camera off just in case it's my Wi-Fi. So apologies. I'll do it without the camera for now. and hopefully that'll give the Wi-Fi a chance to catch back up. The ultimate thing here is actionable recommendations, but also from the perspective of we need to present this data in a way that your teams understand. So often when you deliver your insights, they may not be wrong. It's just that they're unfamiliar to your colleagues and therefore they don't know what to do with that. We also know that everybody's incredibly busy, so we want to start thinking about the things that are going to make the biggest difference to your core objectives, your key metrics, the things that obviously everybody else cares about. We did a webinar on Tuesday, and when we ran the poll in that session, I thought I'd share the results of that, which is we asked the question on when you present customer insights, stakeholders usually, and then ask them to vote on, so take notes, say thanks, carry on as before, ask, but how do we action this? State challenges, challenge the data or the methodology that you're using, or share their own anecdotes that contradict what you're trying to tell them. And ultimately, all of these problems come down to how you present the data. So what we're going to talk about is how you can sort of really present this data in a way that makes sense for them. Where do people start? If you're in the boat of really feeling like there's just too much data to handle, we often see that people end up sampling the data that they're analysing, and they ultimately make gut feel decisions. And to be honest, when you've been in the business a long time, sometimes those can be right on the money decisions. Often, though, they don't move the needle because they don't represent your entire tenant group. They're not evidence-based, and ultimately you risk making the wrong decision. And I think often that is where insight teams feel a bit worried about the recommendations that they're making, because if they don't make a difference to your tenant satisfaction, you know, it does come back to you. At the same time, gut feel often gets influenced by the loudest voices in the room and or recency bias. So we've seen on a number of occasions the CEO has come in and asked a question about something on a previous meeting, and then that becomes sort of priority number one or a focus that you then try and fix, but it's not necessarily representative of the rest of your tenant base. So if you're starting here, or if you feel like this is where you currently are as an organisation, culturally trying to make decisions, the first thing we want to do is just bring you to a point where you are at least looking at some of this data from a representative perspective. So we're looking at all of your data. You're in the first instance looking at volumes, potentially sentiment if we can, to make volume-based recommendations. So what are people talking about? What are the kind of most negative conversations that are happening? These kinds of conversations are really useful for starting to break this data down. A couple of ways in which you can analyze that data using volumes and sentiment: root cause analysis, so essentially going down through the layers to understand what's driving a particular issue. Driver analysis, which is essentially looking at, our sentiment score went down, or our customer satisfaction score went down last month. What was the cause of that? And for those of you that are sort of whizzes in Excel and starting to kind of bring this stuff to life, obviously things like pivot tables and cross tables, where you're starting to look at correlations between two sets of themes, can be really helpful in painting that picture of where issues are occurring. We've then got a group of people who are using statistical analysis, and what we tend to find at this stage is that actually the statistical analysis is coming from often a data science team or a team with statistics or BI analysts. Please don't sit here feeling like you're doing a terrible job if you're not in this stage. This is quite a specific skill set and absolutely something we can help with, but just to give you some advice on some of the things that other people are doing. So things like Pareto analysis, random forest models, these are looking at correlations between your top level metrics and the biggest influences. It's also worth saying that a lot of this stuff is being done in tools like BI rather than on spreadsheets, because it gives you a lot more scope and flexibility to be able to kind of start modeling some of this stuff. I'm not going to talk too much on that specific, on the statistical stuff. What I would say is, if you're interested in any of this stuff, we've done a really nice webinar with Guinness Partnership where they broke down some of their BI dashboards and explained some of the random forest models and how they use them, and some of the decision tree modeling as well that they do. To help with some of their sort of real life case studies. If that's something you're interested in, we'll I'm not going to put the marketing team on the spot and link it in this chat, but what we will do is we'll follow up with you. So just if that's something you're interested in, do let the team know. So the way that Wordnerds would recommend breaking this data down is by what we call frameworks. Now, they may not be necessarily, that frameworks might not be a phrase that you use internally, but essentially what we mean by a framework is just a way of breaking your data down through the lens that matters most to your organization or the colleagues that you're using. So the starting point for this is, what regulations do you operate within? What are the metrics that people care about? And, in examples like what's causing low sentiment in our repair service, how can we break the data down into a lens that makes the most sense for your organization, the colleagues that you're dealing with? Let's take the regulations. The obvious one here is using something like the TSM criteria, so mapping feedback from your TSM surveys, your transactional surveys, in through the lens of the TSM criteria that we've got. So looking at the safety issues, what's a maintenance and repair issue, where is communication fair and honest and transparent, etc., etc. Similarly, what metrics do people care about? So CSAT, complaints, and we use a driver analysis where we're looking at something quite specific like what's wrong with our repair service or our maintenance service, actually breaking the data down by something like a repair journey. So looking at the data rather than through this is everything that everybody said about the repair service, actually logging it through this is where people have an issue when they're logging the issue, where they're logging a repair. This is the quality issues that we're talking about, and essentially mapping that repair journey to something that sits alongside or makes sense for the department leads that might be then needing to act on this stuff. I thought I'd share some frameworks that work for our clients. The first ones are the analytical frameworks. These are the things that you could probably work on today. So user journey analysis, just explaining, just essentially any process where you've got a process. This works really nicely with things like your repair journey, your complaints process. A user journey analysis is a really nice way of just breaking down the steps to understand where there might be issues arising, and then mapping your data to that journey. Root cause analysis, so understanding drivers of complaints, really common one that probably most of you are already doing. Pareto analysis, so looking at the relationship between the top level scores and the data that way. Essentially what Pareto tells you is if you fix these three things, the number of complaints will drop by X, or our sentiment score will go up by X. It's a really nice way of actually getting to a point of prioritization, rather than just saying like, okay, the root cause has delivered us all of these issues and this is what's driving them. What are we going to fix first? Pareto analysis is a nice way of sort of then, once you understand what issues you've got, then working on, if we fix these three things, we're going to see a reduction. What you'll soon notice is that most of the time our clients, insight teams, the best insight teams are not focused on one framework. They're using multiple frameworks depending on the depending on the objective or the problem that they're trying to solve. COM-B, just to explain, is it's a motivational framework we used to understand how we influence different behaviors. And again, if you're interested in that, we can talk about that more as well. And then we've got some really specialist frameworks that we use specifically for our social housing clients. And again, we can share how we've mapped this data as well. Again, you don't have to use Wordnerds. We can just share how we tag the data so that you can break the data down in a similar way, if that would be helpful. The first is a TSM framework. So we've essentially built a series of categorisation models that categorise your data based and organise it strictly through the TSM model. So your 6 core areas of that TSM survey and breaking your data down. It's worth saying that this is a TSM framework to understand your data through the lens of the TSMs, but actually we feed all sorts of data into this. So often this is being used to understand, well, we've got a TSM survey over here, and that was the result that we got. But also, what data can we see elsewhere in the business through our transactional surveys, through our complaints, that can tell us what's likely to be an issue when we go and run the next TSM survey and produce our results. So using that framework to really get a sense of not just the results of your actual survey, but also what could we have spotted earlier, other things that you can prioritize and change. As I mentioned, the repair journey, so understanding that data through a customer journey lens can be really helpful for prioritizing bits that we need to fix. And then two new ones that I thought would be nice to share. The first is prediction. So this is actually a beta that we're running with Town and Country. What I mentioned on the previous slide is that often teams are looking at statistical correlation. What we're realizing, though, is that correlation and causation are not the same thing. And what we mean by that is, we often see a correlation between the number of repairs and then the number of complaints that come in. But repairs itself aren't necessarily the cause of that increase in complaints. So what we're actually trying to do with the prediction model with Town and Country is to better understand what causes a complaint. And then start to look at the triggers and building AI models to understand what triggers might be occurring that then cause an escalation to an official complaint. If we can understand those triggers early enough, can we intervene and reduce the number of overall escalations at the end of the project? So there will, I am sure, be a future webinar. This is something that we're measuring and working on at the moment with the guys there. So what I would say is that we haven't got the results of that yet, and it's something that we're building, but the theory is being tested currently, and I hope that we'll have a webinar to kind of share on this stuff in the future. And as Sarah mentioned at the beginning, regulations are coming thick and fast in this sector, probably thicker and faster than any other sector that we work in. And that creates challenges all over the place in terms of how you organize your data. There's a lot of process stuff that you end up being focused in to make sure that you are in line with the regulations. So what we're also doing is essentially building frameworks that help you to organize the data in a way that meets that regulation. The latest the latest framework that we're actually launching with a customer at the moment is speaking to Awaab's law. So making sure that we can map data based on what the guidance tells us in that regulation to understand where you might not be compliant, and flagging those comments and issues as quickly as possible so that you don't miss anything when it comes to that. I can see some questions have come in, so I will address those at the end. Thank you, Millie. But obviously, if there's any more questions on this or you'd like to see this in play, absolutely come and chat to us afterwards. So hopefully that gives you an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about collecting, categorising and prioritising this data. Ultimately, we want evidence decisions, but also we've seen that this framework actually gives insight and CX teams a really clearly mapped process for how you are listening and acting on your customer feedback, which is incredibly important to the regulator. And just by sort of opening up your processes with this sort of framework in mind has worked for some of our clients who are being regulated and audited at the moment. Similarly, it should give your teams confidence. That's a huge thing. A lot of the time, CX delivery tends to fall down when you have teams that just feel a little bit unconfident in what they're delivering and what they're doing. This process is designed to kind of boost that confidence and really make people feel empowered that they've got the right data and they're making the right decisions. You'll notice, however, that at this point I'm stopping at Prioritise, which is halfway through this loop, and it creates a bunch more problems once you get to this stage, which is once you've got to the point where you've got the right data and the right assets, how do you then convince the teams to act on this information? How do you make sure that it's working? How do we know that actually these things that we've prioritized are actually making a difference to tenant satisfaction? And that is ultimately the next part of that's the next phase of work that needs to happen. So what we ideally want to be doing is reducing the amount of time that you're spending on that insight loop, so that you can spend more time thinking about CX delivery, project management, and actually measuring the impact of some of the activity that you're working on. With that in mind, I'm going to pause there. We will be covering lots of this in future webinars, but there is probably some bits that Sarah can share now on what we can offer to help you with that side of the process.
Wow, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. That was absolutely fascinating. I've never heard particularly the Pareto analysis described like that. I think that was really helpful. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I think particularly that Prioritise, the frameworks, is the most exciting part that we've seen in quite a while at Wordnerds. So really good to see that broken down. I think we have got a couple of questions on that, so we'll get to those. I've got a lovely segue that was given to me by the customer success team on Tuesday. So they did a very, very, very lovely webinar all about from insight to influence. So the 4, 5, 6 that Helen's just referenced there. We had Jenny from Granger. So they are a customer. It was a customer webinar. She's ex M&S and P&O. And she was describing exactly this process. So once you've done that, you've got to that stage, you've prioritized. Where do you go from there? How do you get from those insights to the influence? So I think similar to some of the challenges that you referenced in the polls at the start, how do you get buy-in for those insights? How do you take the stakeholders on the journey with you? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this in the follow-up so you can watch if you'd like. And it is brilliant. It's got Jenny's case study, and then it's got a section from our CS Zoe on all about behavioural psychology and frameworks that you can use for that. So it's really, really helpful. So definitely take a look. But I think it's a really, really great example. If you look at the kind of graph in the bottom left, it's absolutely tiny, but you can see like the meteoric rise in the kind of CX at Granger. When Jenny started, it was very much like just doing what they'd always done before. There was not really any clue of what drivers were working, what weren't, and quite disconnected improvement initiatives, and no real idea if they were actually moving the needle or not. And Jenny references a quote that she used to get told a lot at M&S. It's from the M&S CEO. So what got us here won't get us there. And I think that's quite a nice way of thinking about it. What gets you to this point that you're at now won't get you to the next stage that you need to be at. And, all the time the regulations are tightening. Tenants are expecting more than ever. It's only going to get kind of more problematic from here. So it's about adapting what you're doing to making sure that it's kind of the best in class and that you are ready for the kind of future challenges that are ahead. Jenny references how she was spending kind of days and even weeks on a lot of the earlier parts of the framework that Helen's mentioned. So things like the categorisation piece, it's not easy. And she's been able to switch her time from doing that in kind of days and weeks to minutes with some of the frameworks that we've applied. And that means that a lot of her time, so now 60% of her time is spent on that later part of the loop. So she really does have time to spend on the initiatives, the projects, the things that are actually going to move the needle. And because of that, they've seen a marked improvement in metrics, in the kind of KPIs that they've got within the business. And yeah, she's been really heralded as a champion for that. So like I say, if you've got a chance, definitely have a look. She talks a lot about kind of doing workshops with the stakeholders and also meeting them where they are. So if you use a particular kind of framework within your business, sticking within that so that people are looking at something that's quite familiar to them and quite easy for them to understand, that helps to kind of refocus the brain and make it quite easy to understand where the path is to go forward. And also she talks a lot about kind of impacting curiosity and inspiring that within the business. So definitely take a look. And then as a next step, so if you're looking at this and you're thinking, where do I go from here? Where am I compared to other people? For example, we've just launched a brand new maturity assessment. So it's a few questions. You can go through, work at it in your own pace. It takes about the time that it'll take you to drink a coffee, so about 5 minutes. And you can go through this 6 different categories. You get an overall maturity score at the end of it. And then we send you a personalised kind of next step report as well. So it is really worth doing. And you can review your performance breakdown by category. So it's quite a nice way of kind of seeing where you're at. taking stock of your progress so far. If you are interested in seeing a bit more about what Wordnerds do specifically, so we try and keep these as word nerdsy focused as possible. We're really not very salesy, which Pete always is annoyed about, isn't he, Fresh? So if you are interested in Wordnerds, then you've got my details there. I've got a very simple email address, so drop me a message. I absolutely love to talk, as you can probably tell. So just send me an email, book a chat with me. You've got my calendar link. Then just have a look. See if you're interested in having a chat with us, and we can discuss kind of where you're at, what other people are doing, and how we help you to get to those kind of next steps that you've seen in the webinar. Now, questions, the juicy part. Let me have a look. You've still got a couple of minutes, guys, if you want to get a couple of questions in. Oh, 15 minutes are right on time, Helen. It's so refreshing for us. So I'm going to pop a question up now. We've got a question from Millie. So I've got a question about frameworks. What's the most common framework your clients use? And do you have any real world examples? So I'll give my social housing perspective. I'm very blinkered. And then Helen can come in with kind of a couple more examples, put you on the spot, Presh. So in terms of frameworks that I think social housing clients use, I think the number one is the TSM framework. So we've got a built and trained theme bank that has 126 kind of pre-trained themes all around the main 5 social housing TSM categories. It's got loads of other things as well, so it can be quite flexible if you want anything in particular, but that's definitely the most common framework, and that's just a really easy way of getting all of your surveys aligned within a kind of way that you can trust, and you can get that numbers that I think Presh talked about at the start. And in terms of real world examples, so I've got a lovely case study with Theo from Town and Country, who is an absolutely wonderful speaker. It's a lovely case study. So again, we can include that. It's quite short, but he talks about a specific example that he found using the TSM framework, and that was the cleaning of windows. So people were complaining that workmen were using dirty water to clean the windows. He went into the data, put an exact number on that and who it was affecting and how it was affecting them. And because of that, the business were able to install new taps closer to the kind of individual accommodations and use clean water for the window cleaning, which then he managed to show his impact in terms of improvement of tenant satisfaction there. So that's just a small kind of nugget of where we go from the kind of big top level categories right down to an actionable insight that then you can do something about. Helen, hit us with a retail finance transfer example.
No, obviously they don't use the TSM framework. I think probably some of the things that are quite useful that maybe would relate to clients who are working in social housing is we do a lot of work. So it probably won't be a surprise to any of you that customer feedback and employee feedback often feed into one CX strategy. And the reason for that is obviously you've got 2 perspectives on either side of the table here. And often when you need to find a solution, both stakeholders need to work together to get to find a solution. So we do a lot actually with employee feedback, employee notes to understand how that might be impacting CX drivers as well. Within that, we also use some really nice, we use real sort of research. So things like the Hertzberg methodology, which if you've done any kind of BTEC in business, you're probably quite familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Hertzberg is quite similar. It's an iteration above Maslow in terms of the understanding of what employees need to feel motivated and successful at work. So we've got frameworks that look at that kind of thing as well, and that feeds into a CX model, which is quite interesting, which I think be
really
applicable.
Helpful. Thank you. And then another one around repair journey. So I think one of our favourite frameworks is the repair journey. How does it work? So do we need to capture the stages in the survey? Do you want to take this away, Helen?
Yeah. So the first thing to say about processes like this, where it's a journey, is not to think of them as linear, because often they're not. Again, I'll direct you to the Insight to Influence webinar, where Jenny, our speaker, does actually give her example of how she mapped this practically with her team. But essentially the principles are, when you're looking at something like a repair journey and how you map the stages, firstly, get the business leads involved in the mapping stage, because I think it's really useful to have their input. The other thing I'd say is that because it's not linear, think about all of the touch points and things like what was the quality of the repair like, or doesn't necessarily fit into a flow, as in they started here and they ended here. Some of this stuff is more relationship, and but it's equally important, and it does link, as we've seen in the data, it does link to how people feel about the service that they received. So I think just think about, based on the data that you've got already and a conversation with your leads, just think about all of the touch points and the things that come out, and then start to present that data, map that as something that you can then present as a journey. Again, I think we've got an interactive demo where we showcase what our repair journey looks like, so I can also share that if that would be helpful.
Super helpful, thank you. And then we've got one from Linda. So really good one. From your experience, where does resident involvement tend to fit into frameworks? So in-person discussions, formal resident governance structures, and resident groups. I think that's a great question. So I'll give my perspective, Helen, then you can add to it. I think there's a really fundamental change happening in social housing, right, where tenants are becoming much more empowered. And I think that these involvement groups are becoming much more important. There's much more of a kind of level playing field being seen in social housing. And I think where these frameworks are super, super helpful are, you can take the kind of feedback that you're getting and show the impact of what you're doing, Linda. So it's not just, the kind of you said we did, it's also, you asked us to do this and we haven't done that, and that's why. And that's what tends to be really, really important for these kind of conversations. So it's about taking some of the feedback, the knowledge, the frameworks that you've already got in place, and then showing what you've done and how you've done it, and also why you've done it or why you haven't. That's the feedback that we tend to get. What would you add to that, Helen?
So in terms of how we capture this conversation, I think there's probably work to be done as a sector on how we particularly capture some of the in-person discussions and the feedback that goes into that. We all know that as soon as the resident has spoken about in any format their issues or their grievances or their little grumbles, from their perspective they've told someone, and therefore it's about firstly, how do we capture all of this information? And that really is in the collect stage of the framework. I think that the more important thing is in the impact side of the loop, Linda, the first stage is designing a solution. And that is really, when we break down what design means, that's where the best people are co-designing. And actually, give credit where credit's due, social housing are actually far further ahead than a lot of other sectors when it comes to co-designing solutions with their residents in the loop. So often this requires this is why you need to spend 60% of your time on the impact side, on the delivery stage, because this stuff isn't easy. Co-designing a solution for your with your residents brought into that process is absolutely where it needs to start. And actually, this is where you've got, the best teams are using working groups that bring employees and residents together to help co-design solutions that work. So I would say it largely this framework works to your question on the impact side. Where can you bring them in? Where can you test this information and make sure it works? Because once you've designed a solution, is it the solution that the residents wanted? Does it work for everyone? That's where you need to start gathering more feedback and understanding what that solution looks like in real life. It's okay to kind of test in one setting. It needs to work for everyone. I hope that answers your question. I'm more than happy to kind of take feedback if you think that's if you think we've missed the mark at all.
We've got one last one, Presh. So 2 minutes to go. For complaints, do we take only the initial complaint, or do you take the interactions between the provider and customer to resolution?
Great question. We've done both, actually. So We have looked at first point of contact as a driver of complaints, like what was it that the tenant said in that very first thing that they log, whether that be in a repairs management system or over the telephone. However that is logged, we can take that. We've also looked at the full relationship in terms of, you know, that complaint and then all of the responses and the responses back, and we've looked at both of those interactions. In terms of how we've done it, that actually is largely dependent on what you can get out of your systems in the first instance. So often what we do is just export this stuff raw out of your CRM system or your complaints management system or wherever this stuff sits, and take what we can get. We've also trialed not in social housing, is largely because this is kind of getting into the detail of how the Wordnerds platform works. But one of the things that we do is we look at the number of characters that a particular, you know, when we're looking at data volumes, we're looking at the number of characters that you put through the platform at its most granular level. Don't worry, you don't need to know the characters or anything like that. But because of that, what we've tried to do is potentially like use an AI summary tool to summarize the issue, like to summarize what's happened from from like point one to resolution, just to help reduce the amount of duplication that comes through that process when we export it. Bit of a ramble, but essentially we can do whatever we need to, and it kind of depends on what we're trying to achieve with that complaint. I hope that's helpful, Robin. Sorry, it's a bit loose, but happy to chat about that more if you've got a specific use case in mind.
Robin's from Home Group, so hopefully we can discuss in a bit more detail in the coming months. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Perfect. Well, I really enjoyed that. Thank you to Helen, who's battled lots of personal circumstances to be here. So thank you so much for that brilliant section. I really hope you all enjoyed that and you've got some value from it. As always, we absolutely love your feedback. So you've got my email, drop me a message. We're hoping to do our next one at the start of September, all around Awaab's law and putting that kind of framework into motion in a bit more detail. So definitely stay tuned for that. And also just get in touch with me, and if there's anything you'd like to see next, let me know. I'm always looking for content ideas, so let me know what your kind of burning challenges are. I'm super interested. Really glad that you enjoyed it. So thanks so much for all your lovely feedback. So yeah, it's been great. Go and get your lunch, guys. That was a really helpful hour-long session. So thanks so much, guys. Bye, everybody.